Investigations. Section 603. A. There is hereby authorized to be appropriated for each fiscal year, beginning with the fiscal year ending June 30, 1936, the sum of $2 million for expenditure by the Public Health Service for investigation of disease and problems of sanitation, including the printing and binding of the findings of such investigations, and F. Or the pay and allowances and traveling expenses of personnel of the Public Health Service, including commissioned officers, engaged in such investigations or detailed to cooperate with the health authorities of any state in carrying out the purposes specified in Section 601, provided that no personnel of the Public Health Service shall be detailed to cooperate with the health authorities of any state except at the request of the proper authorities of such state. B. The personnel of the Public Health Service paid from any appropriation not made pursuant to subsection A may be detailed to assist in carrying out the purposes of this title. The appropriation from which they are paid shall be reimbursed from the appropriation made pursuant to subsection A to the extent of their salaries and allowances for services performed while so detailed. C. The Secretary of the Treasury shall include in his annual report to Congress a full account of the administration of this title. Title 7, Social Security Board Establishment, Section 701. There is hereby established a Social Security Board, in this Act referred to as the Board, to be composed of 3 members, to be appointed by the President, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. During his term of membership on the Board, no member shall engage in any other business, vocation, or employment. Not more than 2 of the members of the Board shall be members of the same political party. Each member shall receive a salary at the rate of $10,000 a year, and shall hold office for a term of 6 years, except that 1. Any member appointed to fill a vacancy occurring prior to the expiration of the term for which his predecessor was appointed shall be appointed for the remainder of such term, and 2. The terms of office of the members first taking office after the date of the enactment of this Act shall expire, as designated by the President, at the time of appointment, 1 at the end of 2 years, 1 at the end of 4 years, and 1 at the end of 6 years, after the date of the enactment of this Act. The President shall designate one of the members as the Chairman of the Board. Duties of the Social Security Board. Section 702. The Board shall perform the duties imposed upon it by this Act, and shall also have the duty of studying and making recommendations as to the most effective methods of providing economic security through social insurance, and as to legislation and matters of administrative policy concerning old age pensions, unemployment compensation, accident compensation, and related subjects. Expenses of the Board. Section 703. The Board is authorized to appoint and fix the compensation of such officers and employees, and to make such expenditures as may be necessary for carrying out its functions under this Act. Appointments of attorneys and experts may be made without regard to the civil service laws. Reports. Section 704. The Board shall make a full report to Congress at the beginning of each regular session of the administration of the functions with which it is charged. Title 8. Taxes with respect to employment, income tax on employees, Section 801. In addition to other taxes, there shall be levied, collected, and paid upon the income of every individual a tax equal to the following percentages of the wages, as defined in Section 811, received by him after December 31, 1936, with respect to employment, as defined in Section 811, after such date. 1. With respect to employment during the calendar years 1937, 1938, and 1939, the rate shall be 1%. 2. With respect to employment during the calendar years 1940, 1941, and 1942, the rate shall be 1%. 3. With respect to employment during the calendar years 1943, 1944, and 1945, the rate shall be 2%. 4. With respect to employment during the calendar years 1946, 1947, and 1948, the rate shall be 2%. 5. With respect to employment after December 31, 1948, the rate shall be 3%. Deduction of tax from wages. Section 802. A. The tax imposed by Section 801 shall be collected by the employer of the taxpayer by deducting the amount of the tax from the wages, as and when paid. every employer required so to deduct the tax is hereby made liable for the payment of such tax, and is hereby indemnified against the claims and demands of any person for the amount of any such payment made by such employer. B. If more or less than the correct amount of tax imposed by Section 801 is paid with respect to any wage payment, then, under regulations made under this title, proper adjustments, with respect both to the tax and the amount to be deducted, shall be made, without interest, in connection with subsequent wage payments to the same individual by the same employer. Deductibility from income tax. Section 803. For the purposes of the income tax imposed by Title I of the Revenue Act of 1934, or by any act of Congress in substitution therefor, the tax imposed by Section 801 shall not be allowed as a deduction to the taxpayer in computing his net income for the year in which such tax is deducted from his wages. Excise tax on employers. Section 804. In addition to other taxes, every employer shall pay an excise tax with respect to having individuals in his employ equal to the following percentages of the wages, as defined in Section 811, paid by him after December 31, 1936, with respect to employment, as defined in Section 811, after such date. 1. With respect to employment during the calendar years 1937, 1938, and 1939, the rate shall be 1%. 2. With respect to employment during the calendar years 1940, 1941, and 1942, the rate shall be 1%. 3. With respect to employment during the calendar years 1943, 1944, and 1945, the rate shall be 2%. 4. With respect to employment during the calendar years 1946, 1947, and 1948, the rate shall be 2%. 5. With respect to employment after December 31, 1948, the rate shall be 3%. Adjustment of employer's tax. Section 805. If more or less than the correct amount of tax imposed by Section 804 is paid with respect to any wage payment, then, under regulations made under this title, proper adjustments with respect to tax shall be made, without interest, in connection with subsequent wage payments to the same individual by the same employer. Refunds and deficiencies. Section 806. If more or less than the correct amount of tax imposed by Section 801 or 804 is paid or deducted with respect to any wage payment, and the overpayment or underpayment of tax cannot be adjusted under Section 802(b) or 805, the amount of the overpayment shall be refunded, and the amount of the underpayment shall be collected in such manner, and at such times, subject to the statutes of limitations properly applicable thereto, as may be prescribed by regulations made under this title. Collection and payment of taxes. Section 807. A. The taxes imposed by this title shall be collected by the Bureau of Internal Revenue, under the direction of the Secretary of the Treasury, and shall be paid into the Treasury of the United States as internal revenue collections. If the tax is not paid when due, there shall be added as part of the tax interest, except in the case of adjustments made in accordance with the provisions of Sections 802(b) and 805, at the rate of 0.5% per month from the date the tax became due until paid. B. Such taxes shall be collected and paid in such manner, at such times, and under such conditions, not inconsistent with this title, either by making and filing returns, or by stamps, coupons, tickets, books, or other reasonable devices or methods necessary or helpful in securing a complete and proper collection and payment of the tax, or in securing proper identification of the taxpayer, as may be prescribed by the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, with the approval of the Secretary of the Treasury. C. All provisions of law, including penalties, applicable with respect to any tax imposed by Section 600 or Section 800 of the Revenue Act of 1926, and the provisions of Section 607 of the Revenue Act of 1934, shall, insofar as applicable and not inconsistent with the provisions of this title, be applicable with respect to the taxes imposed by this title. D. In the payment of any tax under this title, a fractional part of a cent shall be disregarded unless it amounts to 1/2 cent or more, in which case it shall be increased to 1 cent.